episode of the Myrrh-Bearing Millennial Podcast. I'm your host, Jill, and if you are liking the show, if you're loving what you're hearing, please like, share, comment, download, subscribe to the channel, whichever way you can. This will help get the show discovered. Thank you so much. Really quick, I want to tell you about my April spring cleaning challenge. I am taking the entire month of April and spring cleaning my house with you or whoever wants to join. I've created a downloadable PDF of a calendar for April where Monday through Friday, each day is broken down into simple tasks that will take less than an hour, if that. So that way, by the end of April, your entire house and your cars are completely spotless inside and out. We're talking every single nook and cranny. You will be decluttering and so forth, and even little projects will be touched on the weekends, like if you need any paint, touch-ups in your house or whatever that looks like, little projects, maybe you need light bulbs replaced or something, do those on the weekends. Now, by all means, if you would rather spring clean in an entire weekend, use this calendar like a task list. It has everything you need on it, and just check mark off every single thing that you're doing. But if you would rather take the month with us and not have it be so overwhelming, then join the Telegram chat that you'll also get info in whenever you join the challenge. So there's a Telegram chat for a free community where we are basically chit-chatting the entire month of April. Any questions you have, comments, if you want to share how your progress is going, that's what this community is for. And this challenge is completely free. Everything's free. So I will link it below in the show notes so you can join the challenge. Really quick about this episode that you're going to hear today, I want to give a trigger warning. It is an absolute beautiful episode, and I'm so excited for you to listen to it. There is a lot of conversation, though, with some heavy topics. We talk about child loss and miscarriage and grief. So I just want to give a trigger warning before going into the show. But I am very excited about this episode. Amanda has become a very dear friend of mine through Instagram. And I'm just so thankful that she was my guest on this episode. So I'm going to go ahead and jump on over to that recording from the interview that I had with her, so that way you can listen to her story. Welcome to another episode of the Myrrh-Bearing Millennial Podcast. I'm your host, Jill, and I'm really excited. This evening, I have the immense privilege of interviewing someone who I think she's just learning how much of an inspiration she's actually been to me over the past 2.5 years. I think it's been. Well, I've officially been Orthodox for a year, and then it was a year before that. So yeah, almost 2.5 years. And her name is Amanda. I found her through YouTube, actually, which I'm bigger on Instagram. Anyone who follows me knows I'm bigger on Instagram. That's my platform that I love. But I was on YouTube, and when my husband started his Orthodox journey, he was telling me about it. I was terrified, and I was looking for any resource that I could from women who were in similar situations to me. And hers was the very first YouTube videos that came up for me with Orthodox conversion stories. And she is truly the inspiration behind what led me to going to the catechumen adult education classes with my husband and our previous priest at our old parish. So I'm so excited to have Amanda on tonight. We're going to be talking about so much involving Orthodoxy and motherhood and miscarriage and infant loss. And Amanda, thank you so much for being here tonight. Tell us about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Yeah, I am just so honored to be on the podcast. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Amanda and sometimes go by Hannah. That is my baptismal name. I live in northern Colorado and I have 3 beautiful biological boys. And yeah, we became Orthodox in 2015, but that was a rough journey on my part. And we've been married since 2010. So in that time period, I've struggled with infertility, miscarriages, and biological children, which have been such a blessing, a failed adoption, and now we are attempting another adoption. So yeah.
Wonderful. I'm so excited for us to dive into these questions tonight, and just for the value that I know you're going to pour into this episode and for the listeners listening. So
like I said, I first learned about you through your YouTube channel. And I think it was like a three-part series was your videos, through your
Mm-hmm.
conversion. And it was very similar to my story. Like, weren't you like angry the first time you went to a liturgy and you walked
Oh
outside?
yeah. Oh yeah. I always laugh about it and it comes up in conversation. Our parish is growing so rapidly, and I feel like more than ever, people want to talk about my story and like laugh all the time about how angry I was, which is a little bit embarrassing, if I'm
Listen, I walked
honest.
out on Pascha and slept in a truck, so I
Okay.
get it. You're not alone.
Hey, you went to Pascha. That's saying something. I just did not.
That was my first ever Orthodox experience.
Oh my gosh, no way. That's intense.
I
Okay,
walked out
that's
halfway through and
yeah.
slept in the truck. But that's why you resonated with me was because I mean, I think I listened to it. Yeah, I listened to it after Pascha because my husband had asked me to go to those classes and I was really hesitant. And then hearing you
Yeah.
that you walked out, was it the priest or the deacon that came out and spoke with you?
The deacon, he's oh gosh, I have such a big heart for Deacon Mark. He's just been through there all through our journey and has just constantly been so loving on us and through our loss and everything. He was actually the deacon that came with us to the monastery to help bury our son. So yeah,
Oh my gosh, that
he's
is
super sweet.
that is wonderful. Oh, well, will you go ahead and I know it was like a three-part series on YouTube. Will you quickly share with us your conversion story into Orthodoxy?
Yeah, so I just want to start by saying like we grew up, my husband and I both grew up in the evangelical, non-denominational world. Nolan grew up as a pastor's kid. My family we were kind of the creasters, you know.
Hmm.
But I was really interested in the faith, especially as in my teenage years, and was able to drive myself to church. So when we got married, we were part of actually a mega church in Colorado Springs. And we went to Desperation Conference, like we're super into Carrie Job, all the things.
Mm.
And we had the opportunity to help plant a church in northern Colorado. So we quickly joined the plant team and we moved our life up here. Um, and within those first 2 years, we had led two huge city groups, is what they called them. They're small groups. One of them had 90 people in it, which we laugh because that's not a
That is
small
not
group,
a
that's a
small
small
group.
church.
Yeah. Oh.
And we lived in like this tiny little three-bedroom duplex. And so all these college kids would just pile in and they're like sitting on the pony wall and the table and on each other's laps and wherever you could find a seat, it was like just crawling over people to get into the door. But it was such like a fun time in life. But Nolan, I knew when we had started, so during that time, this is kind of what led us into Orthodoxy. Not only was Nolan like longing for something else, and something deeper, and he's like, there just has to be something more out there.
Mm.
But we were also trying to adopt at the time, because we were struggling with infertility. And so we actually were learning Bulgarian through a girl in Bulgaria. And she was trading us Bulgarian lessons for English lessons because we were doing our adoption out of Bulgaria. And so Nolan asked her, like, "Oh, are you Christian?" And she was like, "Yes, I'm Orthodox." And that was the first time he had ever even heard about Orthodoxy. So he started digging in and quickly fell in love with the Orthodox Church. His first service, I always laugh about this because he walked into a proclacy service and it was midweek. And so he learned very much about the Mother of God in his first service. But
That's
so he
awesome.
came home and like slowly tried to introduce me to Orthodoxy. I was not into it. And he kept going to services, and I thought our marriage was going to fall apart.
Mm.
He was actually would go to liturgy and like leave early, and we'd go to the late service together. at our church. And this went on for a little bit, and I started meeting with our priest, Father Evan. And if you guys know anything about Father Evan, through his podcast, he is just so sweet and so patient and loving. Um, he was used to some people converting, but he grew up Orthodox. He's
Mm.
cradle. He's Greek. He didn't fully understand a lot of our world coming into it, but he was really patient. And I would ask questions that were probably pretty snarky. Now that knowing my attitude at the time, I'm sure that they were snarky. And he would just answer with so much grace and like patience and just what the church had to offer. Some of the things that he would say, I would leave in tears and then I'd be angry about it because I didn't want to like the church.
Mm.
And then somewhere along the way, Nolan invited me to come to liturgy with him. So I did. But I will say during that time, I also found out I was pregnant. So I was suffering with morning sickness.
Oh no.
We had a very small parish, and the incense was over the top.
Oh, yeah.
Now I'm like soak me in incense, but at the time I was like, I'm going to die in here.
Yeah,
So
I get that.
the funny thing is I also wear head coverings in church, and I didn't know that that was really a thing. So I would like wrap my scarf around my face as tight as possible during the liturgy so I didn't have to smell the incense. But that is why I also marched out. I was like super annoyed that we were there, plus I was getting sick. And on the way to church, we stopped at Starbucks, and Nolan's like, "You can't bring coffee into church." And I was like, "What?" Like,
Oh my gosh.
so my Frappuccino was slowly melting in my car, and I was so angry about it. But yeah, during that day, that's when the deacon came out to check and see if I was okay. And because we had been there through Orthros, where people were still trickling into liturgy,
Mm.
everybody stopped to check on me and see if I was okay. And I was like really angry that everybody wanted to check on me, but also I was like being suffocated by their love. And I was like, I don't want to like any of you. I will resist. Um, so yeah, we joke because those first few months were definitely very rough, and everybody was always so kind and so welcoming and like just so patient, I think, with where I was at and not willing to like budge, and people were okay with that tension.
Mm.
And that just shocked me so much. And um, the turning point was definitely once we had our son, um, things were just easier just to go to one church. The whole like church hopping and going to both was just so intense. So we're like, we can't do this anymore. Um, so we went just only to St. Spiridon for a while. And then on Good Friday or Holy Friday, but Good Friday in the Protestant world, we went back to our old church. And mind you, we had only been at St. Spiridon for like 3 months consistently at this point. And I was so excited to see everybody, so excited to finally, quote unquote, go back to my home church. And I left in tears. And I was so just disappointed and deflated. And I think at that point, I realized that I was ready to become Orthodox. I could finally appreciate all that the church had offered and like the routines and maybe at times, the intensity of it, but everything just felt so meaningful and it had a purpose. And so walking back into a blank, empty building with a bunch of people dancing around singing about how cool God is. And I was like, this isn't church. And
Mm.
so, yeah, that's when we were like, okay. I told Father Evan, I was like, I'm ready to be baptized. And we were baptized on Pentecost. So yeah,
Oh
that
my
was
gosh. Oh, I
it was
love
a
this.
journey. It was so fun.
Oh, I love that so much. And we seriously have so much in common with our conversion stories. Like when we went home, because we live in South Carolina now and we're from
Hmm.
Pennsylvania. That's where my
Okay.
husband originally was introduced to Orthodoxy, was in Pennsylvania. Um,
Hmm.
and when we went home to visit, I think it was in August or something. I went and visited my old non-denominational church because no one, like, they hadn't met our son yet and stuff, and I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
visit and stuff. And I left and I went back to my husband and I was like, I am really sad I didn't go to liturgy this morning. Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't church. I mean, I loved
Yeah.
seeing everyone, but I didn't feel like I went to church that day. So,
Yeah. It's so strange, like how when you lose the context of what church used to be and you're entered into like so much of the liturgy where it's like
mm,
everything has like this depth to it.
yeah.
Um, and then you like return and you're like, this is empty, and I don't know what really we're doing here other than having a pep talk about how cool and great Jesus is.
Like a Christian club kind of is like kind of what it felt like, I guess. I mean, I miss the people tremendously, but yeah, no,
Yeah.
I definitely feel like that it just so happened that the day that I went, they were doing communion, and they only did communion like once a month. And it was the
Yes,
little
same.
like to go prepackaged grape juice and little wafer
Yes, the one
thing.
that like sits on top of like your
Yes.
little.
Yeah, it kind of looks like an hourglass type thing.
Yes, I know exactly. That's what our church did too. So,
Yeah, I was
hmm
like, well, first of all, I didn't partake in it anyways. But it didn't feel like I did anything to receive communion. You know what I mean?
yeah, yep.
Um, because we have so much built up to the Eucharist in liturgy. Um,
hmm
so okay, I love that we connect through that.
It's so
So
great.
and you talked about how you were pregnant through your conversion and
Yes.
stuff. So how has Orthodoxy changed you as a mother and a wife and a friend?
Oh my gosh. I have often sat here just in awe of like my children and this journey that we're on of motherhood, and have just been so extremely grateful for the church. I could not imagine parenting without the church, honestly. And that just goes back partially to what the church has offered me, but also just the journey, like myself, of, having to go through fasting and prayer and meeting the saints and all their wonderful stories. And I feel like having the guidance of the church has just changed me in so many ways. And it's called me to become someone else, call me to be a better version of myself.
Mm,
And I think every Sunday, every Lent, all these fasting seasons, you're drawn into like this deep hardship where you can see your sinfulness and you're like, this is what I need to work on.
mhm,
And without that, who would I be? I'd just be flailing and hoping, grasping at community that truly wasn't there. I think that's just another part, is that for me, Orthodoxy has, I don't know if you see it this way. I feel like you probably would. I feel like so many do, but um, outside of Orthodox faith, you have like a genuine friendships, and that's all great. But once you enter into the church, it's like a family, and
mm,
not just because we're all like godparents and you have godchildren and all these things in that aspect, which I think is so beautiful. But there is something to say that you journey through life together in all of its hardships. And Forgiveness Sunday is, gosh, just my favorite service, I think, of the entire year, because of that, of just like the ability to go to each individual person, and whether that you have a relationship with them or not in some way. Maybe you thought about them once and thought, oh, they look a little funny today, or they look
mm.
tired, and still have that opportunity to ask for their forgiveness. And I just think that just draws you so much closer into being a family.
It,
And I'm just so thankful for the church for that.
I absolutely feel the same way. And I mean, through the use of social media, I feel like I've connected with so many other Orthodox moms just throughout the country. And it's
Hmm.
definitely given me a bucket list of parishes that I want to visit. Um,
Yes.
but we went back home to Pittsburgh over Christmas, and we went to the Pittsburgh Cathedral. And
Hmm.
my husband's godfather is actually currently in seminary to become an Orthodox priest at St. Tikhon's. And
Oh,
so
wow.
they drove from St. Tikhon's over to Pittsburgh to come see us. But it was like immediately walking in the cathedral. We had never been to that one because we attended a different parish whenever we lived in Pittsburgh. Um, but going into the cathedral and meeting the priest and Matushka and everyone, which actually it's funny because the priest there was the priest of the parish we're at now in South Carolina for 3 years.
Hmm.
He moved to the cathedral when we moved to South Carolina.
Oh my gosh.
So we never actually met each other until this past Christmas. Um, and it already felt like family. Like we could talk to everyone there.
Yeah.
And it's just a deeper bond and a relationship because you're all in we're all on different journeys in our Christian, walk through life. Um,
Hmm.
but we're doing it the same, very similar ways because of orthodoxy.
Yeah. I feel like I get that also when I read books about like, from all these different Orthodox authors, and I just I may not relate exactly to everything that they have going on in their lives, but I relate so much to like the searching and the longing and the connecting with the saints or the Theotokos and just this like deepening of your faith and this longing to become more like Christ. And I feel
Mm.
like that's just, I don't know, it's just stronger than it was in the non-denominational world. I don't
It
know how to
absolutely
describe
is.
it.
It absolutely is. And it's interesting, I feel like discussing even the saints with Protestant friends. Um, I was I had a friend of mine that asked me, she was like, please don't tell me that you like pray to saints and Mother Mary and stuff. And I was like, well, actually I do.
Yes.
And she was like, why? Like Jesus is all you need. And I'm like, nah, yes, but there are like all these other, and I didn't want to like over explain anything. Um,
Yeah.
but the best way I can describe it is like, so my patron saint is Saint Mary of Bethany. And
Hmm.
when I learned about her story, I was just like, oh, she feels like a mother figure to me, but she also feels like a really close friend. Um,
Yeah.
and now she's the one person that I want to go to about pretty much everything. Like I love my
Yes.
saint so much. I feel like she's my best friend.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that I mean, I've been Orthodox a little longer than you have, but
Yes.
every year I feel like I keep finding new saints. So
Mm.
my list of patron saints that I am praying to keeps growing. And so now I'm like, man, I don't know how to do my icon corner. I'm gonna have to get like those little miniature icons just to like so I can have all of my friends on my wall. Uh,
That's
but yeah.
really that's how it is. You just got all your friends.
Father Evan, coming, that was one of my questions of like, why do you pray to the saints? And, um, and what's the big deal about Mary, which was another one that I'm
That
just
was
like,
my
oh my
question too.
gosh. What a great question, right? But
What
yeah,
a
he's
deep question.
right. With the saints though, he was like, do you have a picture of like your great grandmother that has since died? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, do you think it would be weird to pull it out and like kiss it because you miss her? And I'm like, no. And he's like, okay, that's the same with like the saints and venerating the icons. And
Oh,
he's like, these are real people who lived and they're an inspiration to your life and they're alive in Christ. And he's like, you're just venerating them and you're thanking them. He's like, it's no different than literally kissing a picture of like someone who's passed in your family. And I'm like, oh, it's so like it just demystified everything for me. And then all of a sudden it wasn't weird. Like just with that very simple thing of like, oh, yeah, we do that. A lot of us like kiss pictures of people who've passed or like we'll hold them close to our heart.
hmm.
And why is that so different than an icon? So yeah, that helps so much.
I love that. That puts it into perfect perspective with that because I know I've had some people ask like, are you worshiping the icons? And no, you're not. You're just they're like pictures. They're pictures of your loved ones on the wall.
Yeah. And they're there to help pray for you and guide you. And yeah, I think it's just so beautiful.
So I would love to know before we jump into some of the conversation about infertility and everything,
Hmm.
um, who is your patron saint?
Saint Hannah, mother of Samuel or the prophetess, she's known by both. Um, that is I love telling this story of how I found my patron saint, because I think that she chose me actually. Um, when I was struggling through my infertility at our old church, I can remember reading the passages about Hannah just crying out to God in her pain and, wanting a child. And I just connected with that so much. And even the passage where, they thought that she was drunk because she was crying so intensely.
Mm.
And so when Father Evan was talking to Nolan, not me, because of course I was not even interested in the church at this time, he was talking about patron saints, and I was more just there to listen.
Mm.
And I was like, I would pick Saint Hannah. And both Nolan and Father Evan looked at me and their mouths were like wide open, like, what? Like, you already have a patron saint picked out, but you're not even cool with orthodoxy. I mean, that's totally normal, right? So yeah, I just think that she chose me and I just connected with her. And even now that I'm not struggling with infertility, I think that I'm so glad that I picked her. And I don't have any regret. I know people have asked me like, "Oh, do you regret, picking her because you don't struggle with infertility anymore?" And it's like, no. I think that at that time in my life, I really needed her guidance, and I was so glad that she was there for me. And now I know, like, was able to like pray for me and was on this journey to motherhood with me. And she's still a parent. She had Samuel, so I think that she's a perfect example of raising
Mm.
boys as well. And I think that that's just really beautiful that I ended up having three boys.
Oh my gosh, it does sound like she picked you.
Yes.
That is such a beautiful story. Kind of shifting gears in our conversation right now, from following you on Instagram, and we've kind of touched on this a good bit already in this podcast. Infertility is a big part of your story, and
Hmm.
as well as miscarriage. And I too lost a child to miscarriage in September, and so the pain is I before I miscarried, I had heard of women who miscarried and I felt bad, but I never understood the level of pain that could come from it until I went through that. Um,
Yeah.
as I'm sure you know. And so would you mind sharing your story and experience for our fellow moms who are listening and maybe going through something similar?
Yeah, sure. So I think like all women who enter into marriage and are ready to create their families, they're like, all right, let's get going and we're gonna have a baby and it's just gonna be so simple. I was 20 when I got married to Nolan, and my mom had had five kids. She had three of us before she turned 20, and then had cancer and went through chemo and radiation. And so they told her she couldn't have any more kids. And then when she was 26, got pregnant with twins. So for me, that was kind of like this example of motherhood of like, oh, like you just keep having kids and your body works it out. I had never heard of a miscarriage before. So I think, let's see, I was married in July. October, we found out that we were pregnant. And like all typical young mothers, you are like, sweet, I'm pregnant. I think I announced it at like 5 or 6 weeks, like the second I took the test, which I'm just like, looking back now, I'm like, oh my gosh. Um, and yeah, so I continued to work. I had a little bit of morning sickness, and my doctor wouldn't see me until 12 weeks. I guess that was typical.
Yeah, that's standard.
To do an yeah, to do an ultrasound. So um one day I was like around right after Christmas, we were headed to my in-laws' house, and at the time they had a house out on the eastern plains of Colorado, very, very small town, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Um, and we were working for them at the time, helping them launch their grocery store. And I was cramping a lot. I remember talking to my sister-in-law who had just had a baby a few months prior, and I was like, man, I am really cramping today. And she's like, oh, that's normal. And I was like, I'm spotting. And she's like, that's also normal. And I was like, okay. So I kind of just like ignored it. It was New Year's Eve weekend. And so the doctors and everything were closed. So I couldn't exactly, call my office. Um, and then that evening, I just stood up and blood was gushing everywhere. So I went to the bathroom, and I think that's kind of when the panic set in because I didn't know what was going on, but it was definitely heavier than a period. And it was coming quick. So I called my mom and I talked to a few different people, and they were kind of like, well, I think you need to go to the ER. I'm not sure what's going on. It was just like so weird, like thinking back to that time because like nobody knew in my life what a miscarriage was.
Mm.
And so I just like, I felt so alone in it. And they're like, it could be normal, it could not. Sometimes people bleed. And I'm like, this is just a lot of blood.
Right.
So, of course, there was a blizzard outside. And so my brother-in-law and my husband are outside, like trying to dig out the car. And we finally go to the ER and it's completely empty. It's like super small town. It's just a 2-minute drive down the street. We get there and um, hospital's completely empty. And the lady's like, oh, we'll just take you back right now. And the doctor is like, sorry, we don't have an ultrasound machine in the hospital. He's like, but we just use this little Doppler machine to look for a heartbeat. And at that time, I was 10 and a half weeks pregnant. And so he tried and he kept pushing. And I think he tried for what felt like 10 minutes. I'm sure it was not. And eventually he was like, so you had a miscarriage, there's no heartbeat. And that was the first time that he explained that I had ever heard miscarriage. And then he kind of went on to explain that, sometimes this just happens. Um, and that I think just shifted. Like we are so young and so early into our marriage, and it was like everything, all of our hopes and dreams came crashing down with it so quickly. And we were just devastated over the loss of our child. Um, and so we got a hotel room that night because we weren't quite yet to my in-laws' house. We still had like another hour to drive. Um, and yeah, we cried so hard that night. And that weekend, I just continued to pass everything. And my in-laws were fighting over like who was going to watch the baby, who wasn't with my sister-in-law. And I just remember sitting there I think I even said it out loud, which, oh, thank God for forgiveness. But I was like, at least your baby's alive. And I just like stormed out of the room, which was totally unlike me. But I just remember being in like so much pain and feeling like nobody cared.
Yeah.
And yeah, then we had a meeting with my doctor a few days later, and she's like, "Oh, this happens. You didn't pass all the tissues, so we have to do a hysteroscopy." And they had to go in and remove just like a little piece of tissue that was left over. Um, and that was just like, I don't know. It was so hard to like be in that space and literally feel so alone. And I was in Colorado, so my whole family is in Southern California. And I'm just like this newlywed who's super young, having my first miscarriage and with no support, no community. I had no friends at the time. It was just a really lonely time of my life. Um, but I just kept praying that, I could get pregnant again and that I would have a child. That's what I really wanted more than anything. And I think at that point, it just became like exponentially bigger, me wanting to be a mother. So we continued to try for another year unsuccessfully. And then in May of 2012, I miscarried in December of 2010. So the May 2012, I found out I was pregnant again. And I think from the very beginning, I knew that I was going to miscarry that baby. It was kind of like just in my bones, my soul, however you want to say it. Like I just knew that um, that baby wasn't going to stay. And
Mm.
I kept telling my doctor, like, I think I'm gonna have a miscarriage. And she's like, we don't test for miscarriages until after your third miscarriage. And I was like, I don't want to miscarry again, but there's something wrong. They did an ultrasound, which I was only 8.5 weeks. And there's the gestational sac and everything. And they're like, well, we don't see a heartbeat, but you're probably just a lot earlier than you think you are. But if you've struggled with infertility, then you know the journey of getting pregnant and you're tracking your cycle and your temperatures and every little aspect.
Mhm.
And so I knew exactly how far along I was. It was really frustrating, I think, to be in the doctor's office and feel like I had to advocate for myself and to feel completely ignored. And I begged them to do blood tests that day while I was there. And they're like, we don't test. And I'm like, please, I am your patient. Please just take my blood. And if I miscarry, then we have blood work from this pregnancy. So the nurse willingly, I say that with air quotes, she was not happy with me, took my blood, and I went home. It was an hour drive home from the doctors, and I miscarried as soon as I got home.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Um, so I just sat there again, like I think I was more prepared because like I said, I knew that it was coming, but I was also just so devastated, like what's wrong with me at that point. I think I really felt the I'm broken um, part of it. Um, so yeah, I think then after that, it was very quickly that we decided to move um, up north to help with the church plant. And I really desperately needed friends at that point. And so we did. We found some friends who were willing to kind of walk alongside of us in that infertility space and the loss space, even though most of them were really young and just getting married themselves. And I kind of felt like I was the scary, taboo topic friend. Like nobody wanted to really enter into the grief with me because they were scared
Hmm.
that it would happen to them. Um, and that was just also really isolating and lonely is to feel like you were that friend that everybody was like willing to be friends with, but also didn't want to have to enter into those hard spaces with you.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that's when we decided in 2014, I still wasn't pregnant again. So we decided to start the adoption. And then in the end of May, so we were matched with a little boy in Bulgaria. And we had gone through that whole process, which is a whole story of its own. But we went on a baby moon and I found out I was pregnant, which was just so exciting. And of course, if anybody has, had a miscarriage, you know that that next round, you're just terrified. Every little
Mhm.
twinge, every ache, every I'm not feeling sick today, or my boobs don't hurt as bad, or
Yeah.
everything is a scary indicator that you could be having a miscarriage. And so, thank God for my doctors, my new ones that I had found up here, who were just so willing to, I think, be in that space with me and recognize the pain that I had already lived through. And she had already done so many tests for me when I had first moved up. Um, and so I called her all the time, every twinge, whatever it was. She was willing to do an ultrasound just to ease um like my anxiety. And so that's how it was for the entire pregnancy of just like constantly scared that he was going to die somehow. And by God's grace, he was born full term. Um yeah, so then I had Athen was my second born. We got pregnant with him almost right away. So Hudson was a year old. And we were like, maybe we should start the adoption again. We weren't sure if we could get pregnant. And so we were like, let's try to get pregnant. And we did right away, which was so shocking. And Athen was born 42 weeks. And then August, we got pregnant with him when I was 6 months postpartum with Athen. So we're like, oh,
Goodness.
everything works. Okay. But we were also just so grateful in that period of just like this relief had come over. Um, and I'm going to jump back just a little bit actually in the story because I feel like this is so, it was like such a God thing. Um, right before we started the adoption in 2014, so it was like the end of 2013, our church at the time, again, we still did not know about the Orthodox Church. So we were at our church, and we were having like this 40 days of prayer that they were doing. Um, and so they would have these evening services. It was like an hour long, like come pray. And it was just kind of like pray whatever's on your heart, pray for the city, pray for all these things. They kind of gave you like prompts of what you could pray for. So they would just play worship music super quietly. It was like all acoustic, and everybody would just like retreat to their space to go pray. And I was alone in the back of that church, just pacing back and forth and crying to myself, like quiet, soft tears about my infertility and really longing to be a mother. And there was a Bible that was laid out on this table, and I walked past it and I just paused to like look down to see what it was open to because it was like laid out open. And it was open to Psalm 113 or Psalm 112 if you're using an Orthodox Bible. And at the end of it, it says that he settles the barrenless or the mother of the empty womb, whatever. How it's like all the translations I get confused, but basically, he settles the barren woman with a mother, like with children in her home, or the motherless woman with children in her home. And I just felt like in that moment, like that was just there for me to read. And I just trusted God so much of like, okay, I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know anything before me, but I do feel like He has given me this heart to become a mother, and He's going to provide this somehow. So that was like through the adoption and these three kids that we end up having biologically. I just felt so blessed that, God had fulfilled this promise. And um, so we're like, okay, let's pump the brakes a little bit. We have three very small children that came very quickly. We want to space them out a little bit, but we knew that we wanted at least four. So we just took a little bit of time, and then we're like, okay, let's try again. And that's when we suffered with secondary infertility
Mm.
again. Um, and I think that one was more of a shocker. And it was like, I'm back here again. Okay. And just trusting God in that space once again of like, you've given me three children. Like, is this you saying, like, I'm not having any more kids? Like, what does this look like? And really trying to be patient and searching for what God had in store for me. And so we're like, okay, well, maybe we're going to do the adoption. I mean, this has always been on our heart. We wanted to do it, so let's look into it again. So we looked into it, and it was like right around the time that we were building our house, and the cost of adoption had gone up. And so we're like, well, we can't do it right now because we need to close on our house and everything. So we kind of put a hold on that. And then once we moved in, I updated all of our information with our agency. We were still kind of in the limbo process of like, do we pursue adoption? Do we keep trying to get pregnant? And that's when I got pregnant with our son Remington, um, which was also just a huge shock and a huge blessing. Um, so with Remington, his story is a little bit tougher, I think, to talk about just because the first two, it was just like so completely different. But with Remington, um, I was sick right away with him. I was so sick. I had hyperemesis, and I was getting infusions at the hospital because I was literally like they told me that like you're kind of dying in a way because you're not getting enough nutrients. And
Mm.
so it was really scary, and we were too scared to announce to everybody that we were pregnant because of obviously, you learn your lesson if you announce too soon.
Okay.
So we walked this very excited pregnancy journey. I had some collaborations that were really exciting on Instagram with Elvie. They sent me some pumps and sneak peek gender reveal test. They did a collaboration with me so we could find out that he was a boy. We're just like so excited to be parents again. And then um, on the 22nd, December 22nd of 2021, um, I was 11 weeks pregnant, and I went to bed that night just really full of anxiety. And in the middle of the night, I can remember waking up at like 2 or 3 in the morning, like almost full-blown panic attack. And I just like woke up out of my sleep. And I knew that something was wrong. Again, like the same, like with our second miscarriage.
Right.
And I just couldn't shake the feeling, but I was like, okay, I just need to go back to sleep. There's nothing we can do about it right now. And all morning long, the next morning on the 23rd, I just kept telling my husband, like, I just cannot shake this feeling that there's something wrong. Like, I don't feel like he's alive anymore. And Nolan was just trying to be super reassuring. He's like, I'm sure he's fine. Like, we had already had an ultrasound. He had a really strong heartbeat. He was growing. Like, everything was perfectly fine. And so he's like, I mean, you can go in if you want. And he's like, but I don't think you need to. And he's like, but that I will leave that up to you. And I was like, I want to go in. So I called my doctor, and she, of course, was on vacation. So they're like, we can get you into the clinic and we will have you see one of our midwives. So Nolan dropped me off because he had the kids with him. And this was still, during COVID protocols, nobody could go with you. So I went in and they're like, oh, it's going to be totally fine. Like, let's just get you reassured. Like, your baby's going to have a strong heartbeat. It's going to be fine. So the first nurse put the Doppler on my stomach, and she searched around for a bit. And like I said, at this point, I was 11 weeks. So I knew that you should be able to hear a heartbeat with those.
Right.
And she just could not find one. And I was just like holding my breath, but I had already known, like, he was gone. I knew it. And so then she's like, let me get a different nurse who's more experienced. So she got a different nurse who had a bigger Doppler. That nurse also could not find his heartbeat. And she's like, man, he must be in a really weird position. Let me go get a different nurse. So a third nurse came in, but this time was like really digging into everything. Like, it was very painful. And she's like, I'm gonna go get the midwife and have her do an actual ultrasound. She's like, I just cannot find it with the wand. So then the midwife came in with like a little portable ultrasound machine. And I was just laying there and I had my eyes closed, crying because I was like, I don't know if I can open my eyes and look this time. Like, I'm too scared. And she put the wand on and I briefly just like looked over and I saw him laying there completely still. And he didn't have a heartbeat. And so she didn't say anything. She very quickly pulled the wand off and was like, I'm going to get you down to the ultrasound techs. And I was really frustrated at that moment because I was like, everybody is dodging me. Everybody is dodging the fact that he is gone. And they got me straight into the ultrasound tech, and I was crying by the time I even got to the table. And I was like, he's gone. I know he's gone. And she put the wand on, and I was like, he's gone, isn't he? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, so I just immediately start like burst into tears and I was like, can you tell me how much, like how big he's measuring? And she said that he was measuring at 11 weeks, and so he would have died within the past 24 hours sometime, which kind of like reassured me that I knew, like I felt it when he had passed. Um, so they sent me back to the midwife, and because it was, Christmas pretty much, they were like, we can get you in for a DNC the next week, and we'll get it all taken care of. And I think I called Nolan at that point, and he was able to come in with the kids, and they're like, do you want us to take the kids out of the room? And I was like, no. Only because I felt like they had been so much that pregnancy journey, and I didn't want to hold anything back from them. They knew that, sometimes babies die. We had already talked about my past miscarriages. So they were a part of this conversation. And I think everything was such a blur. Um, and my youngest son, Athen, he was like, Mommy, you don't have to cry. Remy's in your heart, and he's going to be there forever. And it was just like such a really hard Christmas for us. We decided not to do the DNC, and I carried him to 15 weeks before I delivered him at home, which was so special. And I'm so thankful to all the Orthodox women who, in that time, had shared to a blog. There's a blog out there for miscarriages. So if you pass them naturally, you can um, see what, like, you know what to expect because there's pictures of women pulling the babies out of the sac at different stages. Although I think the earliest is like 6 weeks, all the way through full term, obviously.
Hmm.
Um, and so I had prepared for delivering him at home, and I knew what to expect, and I was able to hold him and have that time with him, um, and give him an Orthodox burial, even though it's not really something that I think that the church may change in the future, but it's not something that's really offered right now unless it's at a monastery.
Hmm.
Um, but we were able to like anoint his body and have him buried at a monastery with a bunch of other miscarried and stillborn babies. And yeah, so I have had a full range of ups and downs and miscarriages and infertility and delivering a little 11-week old, but born at 15 weeks old baby. So sorry, that was a lot.
Okay. I'm I'm emotional with you right now. I'm so sorry that you went through all of that. Sorry.
You're fine.
I appreciate you sharing the story with our listeners, and with me. Uh, and I know that a lot of moms, and myself included, can connect with you on that. And you are not alone, and anyone listening to this, you are not alone. Unfortunately, miscarriages happen a lot more. I don't know the actual statistics. I thought it was like 1 in 4 women or something like that. Like it's
Yeah.
pretty common.
And infertility is 1 in 8.
Yeah.
But again, those numbers aren't always reported, so they actually think that the numbers could be higher. So
And it's crazy. I feel like it's become a little more normalized talking
yes.
about. Um, uh, John was our baby that we miscarried.
Mhm.
Um, and technically he's considered a chemical pregnancy because
Mhm.
I lost him the day that I found out about him. I was only 4 weeks. It was honestly, I found out I was even pregnant through kind of a joke, to be honest. Um,
Mm.
which is a story for another day. Uh, but but to my husband and I, like that was, we lost a child. And so
Mhm.
because we, and as previous listeners of my podcast have learned, we very much believe that life begins at conception.
Yes.
So no matter what stage of a pregnancy you're in, that that's a child. So
Yes.
um now with Orthodoxy, because you had the 2 miscarriages and then you had your son, and your second son was fairly soon after, was that this was more closer to the time that you were converting, right? But whenever you're having a second
Yeah.
son.
So my first one was born just before we were baptized, and then my second one we had already been baptized.
So, and
Um,
then obviously you were like, because 2021 was with Remington, and so, and you had mentioned the
mhm.
Orthodox blog. So how has your faith and your church family and Orthodoxy helped you through those painful times?
Yeah. Well, I think again, it's just such a stark contrast. Like I said, I didn't really have friends through the first one, and even just with the infertility, journeying through those first early years, like I said, we had small groups. We had some really great friends, and this is not against them, but I think that when you are in a church that doesn't really have place for you to carry grief, because it's like a constant pep talk, they have to keep the energy and keep it alive. There's not space for the hardship of life. And that is something that Orthodoxy holds in tension, is this joy and sorrow. that, and they fully acknowledged the grief and hardship of this life. And so, oh my goodness, I just felt that so much with the loss of Remington. I was texting some of my friends while I was actually in the waiting room and stuff. And so one of my friends, I just texted, I said, he's gone. And she had just had like a newborn baby and she dropped everything. And the second I left the hospital, she came over to my house and she crawled in bed with me and like held me. Um, oh, sorry. And it was just so like beautiful to have that and to have that friendship and the deepness of that she was willing to sit, and she's never had a miscarriage, thank God, and I hope and I pray that she never does, but to willingly enter into my pain, but to go so far as to like drop everything and come so quickly to be with me in it. And she stayed for a good long while and we laughed and we cried and it was just so beautiful. And then the next day was the Christmas Eve service, and we went to have the miscarriage prayers read over us, which, for those of you who don't know that the church offers this, there's this really beautiful set of prayers that the priest will read over you in front of the icon of the Theotokos. Um, and we had both of our priests and our deacons, and I was a big mess. I could barely even stand or kneel. And they were just like holding on to me, praying over these prayers over me. And it was a packed house because it was Christmas Eve service. Um, and we have like this little side chapel in our church, and I very quickly like left and retreated over there because I was just like, most people are celebrating. I don't want to be like Debbie Downer in here, even though everybody knew what was going on. And all of my girlfriends just came into the room, the side chapel with me. They didn't say anything. I was just sitting on the ground crying, and one by one, they were like laying at my sides with their heads on my shoulders. Some of them were laying across my legs. They were like holding my hands. It was like as close that they could get to me. They're physically like laying on me. And it was just like, this, this is what the church has to offer, is this beauty of like people willing to just enter into that grief with you and saying like we're celebrating the fact that he's in heaven. We celebrate Pascha in this very real way, in this very tangible way, the resurrection. We can really look forward to that, but through the practices and the beliefs of the church there is the space for grief. And it was just so amazing, I think, to have that, and then to um have the church there to Mother Cassiana at Holy Protection Monastery. That's where Remington's buried. She has actually gone to the Synod of Bishops to have a miscarriage and stillborn service um, created. She helped to create this beautiful service that is offered now because there wasn't one before, and she saw the need. And I was so thankful for that because she was like, no, these children who are born to these Orthodox families, like they're still very much a part of our church, and they still deserve to have these sacred burial grounds. And so we went up there with Father Gabriel. He was our second priest, my head priest, Father Evan. I think he was on like vacation for his 25th anniversary or something. And so Father Gabriel went down with us along with my godmother and Deacon Mark. And it's 3.5 hours from our house. They drove through the blizzard with us to get there and to bury our child. And they helped Nolan dig the hole. And Mother Cassiano is just so sweet and constantly like reminding me of the resurrection, but also like holding me when I was crying in my grief. And so it was like this beautiful, like we have this joyful side, but we also are allowed to have the sorrowful side.
Mm.
don't know, it was just like the tension of being able to have both was so beautiful instead of just the be happy, God's got this, which I have heard so many women say that they, one of my friends recently had a miscarriage and she's still a catechumen. But she's the one who's like, I just, they don't have space for me. They don't have space in their, they don't have the capacity to hold my grief. And so, very like, I don't know how long she had been in the church when she had her miscarriage, but very quickly a bunch of us just jumped in and were able to um, help bring her things and provide the meals and, just in very practical ways, give her some things to help her with her miscarriage. And she's just like, this is so different than anything I've ever experienced. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I think church is amazing.
it is. And I experienced that. We were about an hour or two away from the St. Mary and Martha Monastery.
Mm,
And they have a section of the cemetery that is dedicated to infant loss and miscarriages.
mm,
And I didn't even know about this monastery until right after we had lost John, because my godmother dropped what she was doing and took my husband and I and my kids and took us to the monastery, and we spent all day there.
hmm.
And so I know exactly what you mean by being able to. It was a place where you could hold every emotion you were experiencing, uh,
Yeah.
from the beauty of knowing that your child is with Christ to the grief of and the pain of knowing that that child is also not with you.
Hmm.
Every emotion you could hold there, because you were in truly one of the most beautiful places in the world, in my opinion, is a
Oh,
monastery.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
And I,
you're surrounded by other markers and stuff from other moms who had lost children.
yeah, I mean, Mother Cassiana, she has like this really beautiful small graveyard, and it's almost all babies. Um, Father Anthony, he is at Holy Theophany in Colorado Springs. I believe it's his child who is stillborn that is buried there, and then there's a few other who were either stillborn or miscarried. But she has this really beautiful rock grave for all the moms who have miscarried and didn't have a baby to bury. They could just write their baby's name on this rock and quote unquote bury it in this grave. So she, during that day that we were there, she was like, you need to name your other two children. Um, they are yours. And she's like, if you don't know what to name them, because it has been so long, and she's like, pray the Paraclesis or the Akathist for a week straight and ask the Theotokos to help you in naming your children. But in that graveyard, there is a nun and a deacon, which I just thought how special and how cool it is to have like the deacon and the nun like there with all these little babies, because that's all
Oh,
that's in the cemetery.
oh, oh
Um,
my goodness.
so,
Okay. So I'm still taking a minute to process emotions and wipe away tears. I feel like I'm the most awkward crier in the world, because I'm like, I don't know if you do. I laugh when I cry. I'm not laughing because anything's funny. It's just how I process crying.
oh yeah, I'm like either full on ugly crying or doing that like awkward like laughing slash snorting, and then like all these emotions are building up, and you're like, what is happening?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so are there any, or I'm sorry, what are some tips or advice that you might have for a mom going through infertility or miscarriage?
Hmm. Oh gosh, that's so hard. Infertility, I feel like is just a really hard space to be in. Um, because really there's not much that you can do. Um, I would say for moms who are struggling with infertility, make sure that you have a team of people around you who are just going to be in that space with you and praying. Um, and then also find like a really good medical team. Find, doctors who are willing to do some tests and who are also going to celebrate with you when you do get pregnant and who will cry with you if you miscarry. I think that that's just so important to find healthcare providers who have the space for that instead of just you're not, another cog in the machine for them. Um, and also, if you can get your hands on some St. Anna oil, that I have to tell you just really quickly, this mom who is a catechumen, she reached out to me on Instagram. Oh man, maybe like a little over a year ago. And her story just, she was just not really into Orthodoxy yet, but she was really struggling with infertility and wanted to know what the church had to offer. And I do have a little bit of St. Anna oil left, so I sent her some, and she just reached out to me a few days ago telling me that she's pregnant. Um, and it was just like, glory to God. It was just so cool to be able to, and she was just like thanking me immensely. So it was really cool to be a part of that. And, um, this other mom actually on the same day reached out telling me that she had recently miscarried. And she is so thankful for all the resources that I have on my Instagram. And so, yeah, I think as far as the infertility go, if you could get your hands on some St. Anna oil and then praying the infertility prayers, in the Ascetic Lives of Mothers prayer book,
Such a good
there's
book.
some, yeah, my favorite prayer book.
Yes.
And mine is so tattered and worn and like literally falling apart, but I think it's really cool that it's also in that state because that means that I'm using it a lot.
Yes.
Um, but there are some infertility prayers in there, and I think, just trying to patiently wait and trust God that He is hearing your prayers. But I know the waiting is just so hard. Um, and I'm going to spill the beans just a little bit. I have created a workbook for both infertility and miscarriage, for moms that the infertility one is done. It's going to the printer here pretty soon. We're just going through proofing and everything. Miscarriage one is probably like a week or two away from being done, and then we'll send that off for proofing as well.
Oh my
So yeah,
goodness.
I I didn't even think about that, but yeah, that's super exciting. So
That
just because
is
I feel
so
like
exciting.
I have been in that space, and I know that there's not a ton of resources, so I wanted to create some. But also, yeah, very exciting. I can share more on that later. But Under the Laurel Tree is another really wonderful Orthodox book for
Okay.
infertility specifically. Um, it goes through the story of like Saints Joachim and Anna and their infertility journey, which I think is super cool. So, miscarriage resources, that one is a lot bigger and there's a lot more available. First off, definitely finding a community of people, if you don't have one already, who can just be with you um, on that journey and being willing to enter into that space with you. Just because I think that so often in our society, people are so quick to dismiss miscarriage grief
Mm.
and throw it off like, oh, okay, well, you miscarried, or, in your scenario where it was very early, they're like, you barely even knew about it. Like, get over it. I feel like is kind of this attitude.
Yep.
Um, and that can just be so hurtful. And having been through all like these different stages of, the losses, I wouldn't necessarily say that one is bigger than the other. And I used to like compare my grief to moms who had stillborns and being like, oh, they have like this level of grief that I'm not allowed to touch. And
Mhm.
that's not necessarily true. Um, and I think, having people around you who are willing to walk that with you and have walked it is just so helpful. Naming the child is an absolute must-have book, in my opinion. I think that there's so many beautiful books out there, but naming the child, it's actually written from a mom who had never miscarried, but from the perspective of that. Um, But I just found it so helpful, along with what Mother Cassiana had told me about the importance of naming our children.
Mm.
And since naming them, we named them Eleni and Elias. I'd always felt like our first pregnancy was a girl for some reason. Um, Gosh, I talk about them so much more. It's like they have this place in our family finally, because before it was like our two babies that we miscarried. It was like super awkward to talk about them. And now I'm just like, oh yeah, Lenny and Elias. Like it's just so normal and freeing in this way to have named them and
Yeah.
for them to be like, yeah, they were, when we talk about them with the boys, they were your siblings. They ask questions about them occasionally. And I just feel like so much healing has come from being able to name them. So I 100% recommend that book, or, speaking with like a priest or a nun about naming your child. Um,
I know.
Gosh,
So I don't mean to
it's
interrupt, but I know another, when we lost John, my husband had reached out in an Orthodox dads group
mm-hmm,
on Facebook or something, and they said that, I don't know, I don't remember if it was an Orthodox tradition, but it was actually crazy the way the story happened. But our son was named John after Saint John Chrysostom.
mm,
And it was funny. So my husband's name is Robert John. And we had
mm-hmm.
always known that if we had another boy, we wanted to name him John, because our son that is almost a year old is Henry. And I kept telling him, like, the next baby we have is going to be a boy. It's going to be a boy, and we're going to name him John. And that's just what's going to happen. And found out I was pregnant, lost John the same day that I ended up finding out I was pregnant. Um, but my husband wasn't here. He was in Chicago for a work trip when this happened. So he didn't go through it. Like, he wasn't here for it,
Mm-hmm.
to see the physical stuff. So it took a little bit more, like, his processing took a little bit longer, because
Yeah.
it was like, wait, hang on, what happened? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so he reached out in this Orthodox dad group, and they said about naming the child after the saint that is celebrated on the day that the child is miscarried.
Oh,
And the day that we miscarried John was, I'm gonna get this term wrong, but it was the day, something with the death of Saint John Chrysostom. It was in September.
oh, mm-hmm.
But it was Saint John Chrysostom.
Wow.
And I had been saying for months beforehand, I was like, our next kid's gonna be a boy, and it's gonna be John. Um, and so I don't know if that's like a tradition, but that's what was said. And the person who had commented, I believe, also referenced that book called Naming the Child. But it just kind of all came together, and we were like, holy cow, like, obviously God was working something with this and with St. John Chrysostom this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but
I
that's
think
how
I
we
have
got
heard.
the name.
Yeah, I can't remember if that's in the book or not. I was reading so many books at the time after we lost Remington that I feel like they all kind of blur together, if I'm honest. Um, yeah, there's also a book that I just want to throw out there because I think it could be beneficial to moms who maybe didn't miscarry but um, are in the space of having a terminal diagnosis for their child.
Mm.
Um, and that's Walking the Labyrinth of My Heart. It's by another Orthodox mom who had a terminal diagnosis for her daughter, um, which is just such a different journey that, gosh, the grief that, you just carry for that pregnancy and after. So yeah, that's a resource for anybody who may be walking that journey, which is very, very difficult.
And to anyone
Um,
listening, everything that Amanda is listing as resources, I will be sure to link below in the show notes, so that way you have access to all the links for these books and resources that she is recommending.
Great. There's also a book, Memory Eternal, that was just released by Sarah. Oh my gosh, I cannot remember her last name. I think it's hyphenated. It's on ancient faith. Um, just a general, I feel like, good book about how the church handles grief and loss. And I think it's just a really good book and resource for people who are walking this and dealing with grief and wondering what the church believes and thinks about loss. And I think even again with it coming to other diagnoses and loss that maybe occurred, 30 plus years ago. I recently had a lady who is a catechumen who came up to me in church while I was talking with a friend who had miscarried, and just providing some resources. And she was just in tears. And she's like, I'm just so thankful for you and all the resources you share and for the church because I miscarried over 30 years ago. And she's like, I've never told anybody. And she was like, this is the first time that I've talked about it. And oh gosh, I was just like, that's a lot of pain to carry for all those years.
Mm.
So yeah, I have so many resources listed on Instagram. I feel like I don't know what all of them are. But again, you can just go steal whatever you want to off of my Instagram page too to link.
Well, it's a good thing you're bringing that up. Can you tell everyone what your Instagram handle is, please?
Yes, it is growing this home. No spaces, dots, nothing like that. Just growing this home.
And I'll make sure
Um,
it's linked in the show notes as well. I've always loved your Instagram handle. I think it's beautiful.
Thank you. I actually was just thinking about yours the other day and I was like, oh, this is so fun and creative and I just really love it. It's so great.
It used to not have the little underscores in between it,
Mhm.
but my old account got hacked. So I lost that handle.
Sylvia from Orthodox Mom, whoever is following her or who has followed her will know that that happened to her account, I think, gosh, 2 years ago. And I just remember she was so upset about it. She texted me right away and was like, can you please go check my account and see what's going on? And they had already like locked it up and they told her she could never get it back. And I just remember her being so like devastated. And she, I think by God's grace, was able to somehow, because I know that this is not a normal thing, but she got it back.
What?
And yeah, months of emailing, um, Instagram, and lots of conversations. But she had changed her handle just to her name at that point and was like, well, I can't, create another Orthodox Mom account. That is the account. And yeah, so I know
Gives me some
Instagram and
hope.
hacking. Yes.
I mean, it's a blessing. Like, this is so off topic. But like, I definitely don't want my old account back because like the new account, even though it has less followers as I'm growing a brand new account, it's definitely way more niched. And because I was posting this stuff immediately, like the algorithm knew exactly what I was talking about. So my community has so much more engagement on this account. I just want my handle back.
Yeah. I would be very sad if I lost my handle. I've grown very attached to it.
So,
And people, I'm gonna laugh really quick. Just this is like an Instagram thing, and you would know this, but someone recently, one of my friends, who's now a really great friend, she came up to me one day in church, and this was when she first started attending St. Spiridon. She wasn't Orthodox. It was like her first time at the church. She chased me down on the sidewalk and was like, "Hey, I follow you on Instagram." And she like told me her handle so that I would recognize her and was like, I was like, "Oh, this is so great. Like we don't know each other's names, but we know our Instagram handles."
I
And
do
that has
that
happened
all
when
the time.
I visited St. Andrews in Riverside one time, and that happened there. Someone was like, "Oh, I follow you on Instagram. I love all your stuff." And she's like just rambling on, and I was like, "Hi, what's your name?"
And we feel so like I feel like we feel so connected into people's lives that we follow. Like I'll be having conversations with my husband and I'm like, "Well, my Instagram friend is doing this." And he goes, "Well, what's their name?" I'm like, "Uh, their handle is
Yes.
this."
I know, or I'll like talk to my mom doesn't understand like Instagram does have genuine friendships on it, and so
Yes.
she's always like so confused. And I'm like, "Oh, my friend so and so," and she's like, "Is this another one of your imaginary Instagram friends?" I'm like, "They're not
But they're real people, like
imaginary.
they're real friends.
I text them, I message them, we have conversations. It's a real friendship."
Well, before we end, I would love to ask a fun question since we're
Okay.
already laughing. What are some of your favorite Orthodox traditions to do with your family? And I think that this is a super fun question to ask right now too, as we're a week from Lent.
Yes.
At the time of this recording, and it's currently a week away from Lent. But Amanda, what are some of your favorite Orthodox traditions?
Mm, I really, really love baking koliva for Saturday of Souls. I think that's probably like one of my top traditions to do with the family. I think it's just so easy for kids to get involved with that one.
Mm.
Um, Obviously, just like some really fun Lent stuff would be like using the Draw Near Designs calendar, um,
Yes.
and going through like the daily meditations. I love to name the Garden of Our Hearts, and they actually have a little workbook for those of you who don't know that. It's on Etsy, so and it's for kids specifically, which I think is so cool just to be able to invite them into that. Um, and of course, why would it not be? I love dyeing Pascha eggs bright red, and it is a competition at our church who can get it the deepest, darkest, beautiful red. And there's always, of course, this like onion skins versus the Greek dye. I'm a
Oh my
sucker for the
gosh,
Greek
yes.
dye. I'm like, the onion skins are like more brown, but I guess you can call it red. And I'm just like, if my eggs are not perfectly dark red, then, I have to start over again.
It's actually something we haven't done yet, and I'm very much looking forward to doing that this year.
Oh my gosh. I think honestly, I know that everybody says this and it's so cliche, but like Lent and Holy Week and Pascha, it's literally my favorite time of the year because I feel like there's just constantly so much going on
Yep.
and like all of this service, especially as you enter Holy Week, you like have this build up to all these really amazing services and it's so fun. And I like talk about Pascha all the time and Holy Week with this energy that if you're not Orthodox, you don't understand. And I'm like, oh, but it's just so great. And why you don't understand any of it. So I'm really sorry that I'm like acting like this really weird person who has all this energy talking about Easter. So
Oh, it's so funny because whenever people like hear my conversion story, they hear, well, you walked out halfway through the first Pascha you ever went to. And then
mhm.
last year, we were chrismated the weekend of Pascha, so it was a very busy weekend.
Oh, yes.
And our son was baptized. Like the three of us were chrismated, and our son was baptized all in the same weekend. So so much happened. Um, and then Pascha happened, and also living in South Carolina now in Charleston, like it's very warm here. So it was nice weather. It was not cold walking through snow around Parish like we did in Pittsburgh. Um,
Yes.
but I remember like when we walked around the church and we got to the doors and the bells are ringing and we're knocking on the door to go inside. I'm like, why does every denomination in church not celebrate Easter like this? This is
I
amazing.
It's so good. Also, a non like feast day tradition that I really love, which is so funny. Um, Baking Phaneropita for Saint Fenorios because I lose everything in my life. If you guys don't know about this tradition, you ask Saint Fenorios for intercessions to help you find your lost item,
Yep.
and when you find it, you have to bake Phaneropita. And Nolan, my husband, he's like, dude, you owe him like 7 cakes. So on his feast day, that should be like the biggest celebration you've ever hosted because you just like are in debt to him for everything.
I did not know you were supposed to bake that cake every time you ask for his help. I owe him so many cakes.
I know, right? And yeah, you're supposed to like share it with your friends and your community. So I'm just gonna have like a Phanerope bake off or something and
Oh, I feel
make
like
up
the
for all
church
these.
should just because we always have coffee hour afterwards after liturgy. So I feel like every week someone should just be making one of these cakes for the whole parish to participate in.
Right? It's like we all know that you guys have said these prayers this week. One of you lost something.
One of you lost your keys, you know it.
I lost all of my kids' baptismal necklaces and I was like distraught. And we were, our old house, we were renting it out for Airbnb for a couple of years. And I was like, oh my God, like there's no way I'm gonna find them. And I was so like upset about it, because we'd have to like move out of our house pretty much and then have it rented. And when we moved out, like officially, because we sold it, I found all of the kids' baptismal necklaces, and it was just like the sweetest like gift of like, Oh my God, thank you, Saint Penorius. You're like the best patron saint ever.
I'm gonna have to ask you to send me a link for the recipe on how to make this cake, and I'll link it in the show notes for the podcast too, for anyone who needs it. But this way I know how to make it.
Yes, I will send you the link. And I'll send a gluten-free link because for all my gluten-free friends who need one.
So Amanda, are there any announcements or offers you'd like to share?
Um, well, just the announcement of our adoption. We are just inviting the Orthodox community as a whole. I know it's so weird to like say this. There's not a lot for adoption in the Orthodox community. And so we're just asking for prayers through this journey and asking people just to come alongside us and celebrate the highs and lows with us. This is just a big leap of faith. For anybody who's been through the adoption process before, you know that it can just be a lot. It's really heavy. It's not easy to do. It's very emotional. Um, there's just a lot of moving parts to it. And, adoption is born out of loss. And I will never stop saying that little quote because I feel like it's so easy for a lot of people to think like, oh, you're rescuing a baby. And it's like, no, this mom who really, really, really loves her child, who carried them to full term. Gosh, I mean, if you've been pregnant before, you know that that in itself is just a very difficult journey. And
Yes.
then to, at the end of it, not keep your child, but to hand them over to a different family to be raised. That's a big, big loss, and that's heartbreaking. So we're just asking for prayers for our future birth mother and our child, which we hope is a daughter because we are really pursuing adopting a daughter. Yeah, that's kind of our announcement where we're at right now. It's super exciting and also a very scary time.
And I will have all of the links for everything. Because you have a separate Instagram dedicated to the adoption journey, right?
Yes, we are trying to keep it separate just so that people who are outside of Orthodoxy could even participate. And also providing adoption resources along the way, and just have that landing page for anybody who in the future wants to say, like, oh, I would like to, have some of these resources. That would just be a page dedicated to that specifically.
We're gonna have to bring you back in the future, just to have an episode dedicated to adoption.
Yes, that'd be so fun. But let me get further along in the process or
Yeah.
have hopefully adopted. And that way I could, complete the the
Yeah.
process here.
Yes, we would love that. And
Um,
in the meantime, we will be following along your journey. I will make sure
Thank you.
that your accounts are listed, and I have a goal of helping her raise some money towards her adoption journey through the podcast. So I will be linking her. Is it a GoFundMe? Like what? How are you raising money?
It's called Give Send Go. It's very similar to GoFundMe.
Okay.
It's just they process it a little bit differently. We also went with them partially because they're a Christian-based company, so you can actually
Oh,
just kind of a little bit cheesy, but you can send a prayer instead of like a
I love it.
donation. And GoFundMe just has been tied up in some really weird things lately, so we kind of just wanted to stay away from that platform and all
Yeah.
of its weirdness.
I don't blame you. Okay, so I will have all of that linked for anyone who just feels drawn to help contribute in any way to their adoption journey. I will
Yeah,
have all of that information and be sharing that
thank
in
you.
show notes as well.
So
And
sweet.
thank you
Yeah,
so much, Amanda.
of course. I also wanted to share really quickly
Yeah.
with the workbooks that I'm going to be putting out. My
Yes.
company that I'm launching is called Sela Design Company.
What
It'll
is it again?
fall
Sorry.
Sela Design Company,
Okay.
Selah. Um, yeah. And so when I finally like launch that platform and everything, I'll make sure to send you the links. And hopefully, if your bookstore, your local parish, is able to carry them, I have started talking to some bookstores who are willing to carry, even just like one or two copies of each, just to have on hand at the local parish as resources for the moms. So if your bookstore is interested, they can contact me directly either through Instagram or the parent company my husband and I own, which is Parish Life Connect.
And your
They
husband
can just
also just launched an Instagram, right?
Yes. So this is really funny. Parish Life Connect is kind of like this web platform that we do, which we are expanding into content creation, because really the heart of Parish Life Connect is to bring people into the church, but also give people who are in the church resources. So PLC is kind of like this umbrella company for a lot of our smaller ministries, which his new thing is Finding God. And that's for people specifically, targeted towards people specifically outside of the church, to kind of have this bridge into the church and just breaking down a lot of these barriers of orthodoxy. And so, yeah, that's his goal. We both feel very called into the catechumen space. So I think it's really cool.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing that you have all of these resources. I
Yeah.
sometimes I wonder how you have time to do this.
I think, if it's a gift that God has given you,
Mhm.
then somehow by God's grace you will have the time naturally. And at least in this period of
Yep.
time, this is what God has called us to. And so somehow there is time.
Yes. Oh my goodness, Amanda, this has been truly amazing, and I appreciate you more than you know for coming on here and sharing your story. And I know there are going to be listeners who connect with this, and you have just provided so much value in this episode. And I just thank you for being vulnerable and sharing those stories. And sharing those resources that are going to be so beneficial. I will, like I said, I will link everything in the show notes so it's available to everyone to see. And I will make sure that all of Amanda's socials are linked. So that way you can go follow her. She has been such an inspiration on my Orthodox journey and through motherhood and through my miscarriage. Definitely go follow her. And Amanda, it has just been such a privilege and a blessing and an honor being able to interview you tonight on the podcast. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. And I feel so honored and blessed to have been a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
You've just listened to another episode of the Myrrh Bearing Millennial Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And if you liked what you heard, please share, comment, like, subscribe, all the things to help the show get more discovered. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.